Hello, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. I don't need to give a long intro for Brian. He is the global ambassador for the World Evangelical Association. So he works all over the world. He has his finger on the pulse of what God is doing through evangelical churches worldwide. And he understands what we do specifically as international churches. And he brought us a great talk last month. And this month, he's prepared a talk for us on leadership. I think you're going to really enjoy it. We'll have the same format this week as we did last month, where we will have a time for him to speak to us, and then we'll have a live Q&A. So as you're listening to the talk, if you have any questions, send me a private chat. I will keep track of them, and then I'll call on you to share your question with Brian afterwards, assuming we have enough time. We will go into breakout rooms at the top of the hour at the latest, and then from the breakout rooms, they'll close in prayer, and you'll be done from there. So we look forward to having our time together. And don't forget, June 8th will be our third and final session with Brian Siller, same times as today. With that, I'm going to ask Warren Reeve if you would pray for us, and then we will jump into Brian's talk.
Happy to. God, thanks for this privilege that we have of collecting ourselves via virtual. We thank you for Brian, his consideration. We thank you for your hand on his life as he's traveled the globe, for his sage comments that lift us up and help us move forward. We ask, Spirit of God, that you would anoint our discussions and our conversation, and that today, in some form or fashion, we would leave this time together a little bit more like Jesus, so that we can lead more to Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen.
Today I'd like to go into Acts 9. It's the early part of the history of the church. Let me read. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" Saul asked. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting," he replied. "Now get up, go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do." The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard a sound, but didn't see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision. "Ananias." "Yes, Lord," he answered. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight." "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name." The Lord said to Ananias, "Go. G-O, go. This man is my chosen instrument. Carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings and before the people of Israel. I will show him how much you suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he was strengthened. We have here at the core of this message, of this text, seeing, vision. We use the word paradigm. Paradigm is the way we see. Nikita Khrushchev loved to tell this story of a problem they were having with thievery at a woodworking factory. And the story, as I recollect, goes something like this. The laws were brought into effect. And so the guards were making sure that everything that was going on accorded with the new rules. When guards saw Peter Petrovich walking out, pushing a wheelbarrow with material in it, and of course the guard says, "What are you stealing, Petrovich?" And he said, it's just shavings, comrade. Come on, it's gotta be more than shavings. And dump it out. So he dumped it out, and sure enough, it were shavings. Well, this went on day after day, and the guard finally said, "Petrovich, you don't get out of here until you tell me what you're taking." Petrovich looked a little sheepishly, looked down at the ground and looked up at the guard and said, "Wheelbarrows, comrade, wheelbarrows." The guard only had vision for what he thought was being taken inside. He didn't have the broader vision to see what was really going on. Here in this story, Ananias had a particular way of seeing. So when the message came from Christ to go find Saul of Tarsus, there was only one paradigm. There was only one way for Ananias to see or to hear. And that was through fear. It's a natural human response. If I was Ananias, I'm sure I would have felt the same way. But if it characterizes us, fear becomes a disabler. Fear is so deeply emotional. It can cause one to lash out or to run away. But fear in any kind of circumstance, when it becomes a continuing factor, it shuts us down. Of course, just the name Saul from Tarsus to a Christian in Damascus would strike fear. They would have heard that Saul had received these letters from the synagogue, received these letters of authority to go to these synagogues. So this was the paradigm of fear. Now, he moved fairly quickly, but it was a choice he had to make. He moved from the paradigm of fear, the vision of fear, the way of seeing fearfully, to seeing through faith. Now, faith is a word that we throw around fairly easily. People say, "What's your faith?" Let me suggest that here's how I've come to understand these various aspects of our faith. I see hope as being the paradigm of the heart, hopefulness. It's what I aspire, it's what I look to, it's what I'm open to, hopefulness. Belief is of the mind. Belief is what I believe. I can describe, I can argue with you, I can write it down, I can refute, I can persuade. I believe this, I don't believe that. So belief is cognitive. Hope is how I feel about life and what might be. Belief is what I think about, and I say, I believe in that, but I don't believe in this. Faith is neither the heart or the mind, it's of the will. So the will, of course, we are unitary, things are integrated. But faith is something, what I do. That's why the writer of the Hebrews says, faith is a substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. To use judicial language, faith is evidentiary. Faith is evidence. So when you go into a court and you are charged with speeding, the policemen say, I believe you were speeding. I saw with my eyes that you were speeding. But you say, no, where's the evidence? Evidence is something that can stand up to scrutiny. So faith is a substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of what is not seen. Now, hope, of course, sees that as a future reality. Faith is to live today as if it's a current reality. Beyond possibility thinking, faith is something that is more than expectation. We have been treated to all forms of possibility thinking over the last number of years. Robert Schuller introduced us to that. And various ones today working their way through various forms of discussion of faith, whether it's so-called health and wealth, various things that if you can think about it, therefore it's true. But beyond possibility, faith is that which is based on the anticipation that God is acting. It's interesting in that text in Hebrews 10, it has this almost parenthetical insert, and it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Just a moment. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. If I believe in him, doesn't that please him? Well, sure it does. If I live a holy life, does that please him? I think so. That's not what the text says here. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. What is that? There is something about our relationship with the Father where our absolute trust and faith in him solidifies both our relationship to him and brings us into a journey, a walk, a shared path. Reminds me of my little daughter years ago. She came to a street and she was always instructed to look each way before she went across the street. And what she did, she just tucked her hand in mine. She didn't look anywhere. She just trusted Daddy. She had faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. Faith is going beyond what I can do without his help. I need his help to move. Joshua 3. It was time for Joshua, the young leader, to move the people of Israel into the promised land. And his instruction was to the priests to walk into the Jordan. And I'm sure when Joshua heard that call, he thought, I got a better idea. Why don't you stop the water and then we'll walk across? That's not the word. You see, faith is working without a plan B. It's moving into a place where without God's help, I'll fail. Now, I'm a type A personality, gentle, sensitive, caring, laid back. Here's my problem. I hate losing. I hate to lose. And when I trust God, sometimes I work on a plan B just in case God doesn't come through. I want to control it. Faith is giving up control to God. Ananias, he came to a place where he saw an opportunity that up to that point, he had no understanding of how God would do this to a person like Saul. How are we changed? How do we come from fear to faith? How do we see through a different window? How do we create a different paradigm? Viktor Frankl was a Jewish psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz. He wrote the book Logotherapy. And it was a discovery of who survived. While he was in Auschwitz, of course, as a psychiatrist, he would observe. He saw that strong, muscular people who were dominant. They often didn't survive, but people who seemed weak or small or inhibited, often they would survive. And he wanted to know what was the difference, what made up people who saw something that others didn't see. And he developed a theory called logotherapy, that in their mind, therapy by word or idea, there was a paradigm. There was a way of seeing something that mobilize them out of their current circumstance into the future, moving from fear to faith. Faith is not easily come by. In the mid-90s, I was serving as leader of the Evangelical Fellowship in Canada. And the oldest and largest school of our kind, Bible College and Seminary in Toronto, had gone bankrupt. And I was home, Lily and I were home one evening in early June of 95, and they called and said, we need a president. I said, I have no interest. The academic world, I had gone through and done my work, but that wasn't my field. But here we had the largest school, the oldest of its kind. And I talked to some historians as to the consequence of losing that school, and it was enormous. As I looked at the school and entered into it for the next 16 years to rebuild it and change the name and make it into a university and buy a new campus, there were two forms of fear that kept the school from solving its problems. The first was the fear of failure. As we moved into that post-95 period, there was a fear that they would fail again. And built into the system, because they had failed, the fear was so endemic of failing again that it took time to move that away from where we were. But then that was compounded by the fear of change. Education was changing. We were moving into a variety of forms of delivery. Different needs were expressed. Young people weren't prepared to spend 4 years to get a Bible college degree if they weren't going into public ministry. All of those things required change, but there was fear of change. And as we get older, we are reluctant to change. We can learn from it, but not to be ruled by it. The paradigm of faith begins, first of all, with examining your needs and opportunities. Now, Ananias, he had instructions from the Lord. As I read that text today, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be much simpler, Lord, if you could just speak to me in such clear, articulate language where there would be, it wouldn't be obtuse, it wouldn't be misunderstood, it would be so absolutely clear. But of course he doesn't. He expects us to begin. So as you look at your own ministry, where are you today? You may have been in a city or a region for some years and you're a little fatigued. You're wondering, where do I go from here? Do I stay here longer? What are my gifts that match this place, or am I out of sort? Some people have left because they're unhappy with me. Is that enough for me to leave? The city is changing. I'm older. There's a whole number of factors that go into play. One thing I'm encouraged by Ananias, he didn't obfuscate. He didn't think of things that weren't there or pretend things that were there that weren't there. He knew specifically of Saul of Tarsus. There was no misunderstanding. He looked at the need. He looked at the situation. He was honest and candid about it. The second thing I have found is evaluate your gifts. Now we can overdo this. Of course, we can overdo it. Like any particular gifting or insight we can overdo. But I have found it to be so helpful to understand who I am. The various tools at our disposal are so helpful. And also to get a response from other people so that I have a better understanding, and they do too. It can manage expectations, both inside myself and with others. So where am I gifted? When I started out, I had expectations in a particular area. And I worked away at it. I studied at it. I tried, and I was a failure because I just didn't understand what my gifting was. It took me some years to figure that out. But that's something we need to do habitually, refresh ourselves, because we do change. We live out of, we grow out of the same root system, but we do change, and circumstances change and needs. Sometimes when a crisis comes on you, when someone's fallen over the boat into the water and they're drowning, you don't ask yourself, Lord, do I have the gift of rescuing someone from drowning? No, you reach down and grab them by the scruff of the neck and pull them out. Sometimes you just do what has to be done. Then enumerate the problems, the possibilities. What's out there? What are the kind of things that I can do, that can be done, that shouldn't be done, that ought to be done? Examine those. And then define what your goal is. What do you want to accomplish? What is needed? What can be done in reasonable expectation as you move from fear to faith? Faith has become such a wonderful, my new understanding of faith has become such a wonderful experience in my own life. When I realized that faith is something I do, it's not what I hope for or what I believe, is something I do. And in moving forward, as Joshua did into the river, as he did, the water stopped. It was not going to stop before he moved into the water. It happened only when he put himself in the vulnerability of the situation. Faith is doing that without God's help will fail. Faith isn't doing things I know I can do, I can accomplish. Put it before the Lord. Think and act now as if it's becoming a reality. Ask for that vision to see by faith that which His grace will do. Yes, our calling is taking on our own particular worlds. And that requires a vision of faith. Doing it the old way or operating in one's comfort zone generally isn't enough. Ananias, in responding to the vision, brought in a student who is an apostle, missionary, pastor, teacher, writer. He unleashed the gospel by writing it down. That's not a bad heritage for Ananias. Today, in our lives, as we serve Christ, may we deliberately move from the paradigm of fear to one of faith. It doesn't happen because you think about it or pray about it or moan about it or hope about it. It's something that happens when you do. When you do something, when you have an action plan and you engage the action plan, and you trust God in ways that without His help, you'll fail. Faith is taking the opportunity, the risk, obedience to the Spirit, and taking that first step. You and I have no idea what doors will open until we knock. Indeed, thinking of a metaphor of a hallway and doors, you and I don't even know there are doors there until we walk down the hall. And we don't know there's a hall until we open the front door. It begins with that first step. It takes courage. It doesn't take an obnoxious personality. It takes courage to do what you need to do, what I need to do, that God's calling me to do, and take the risk so that with His help, it can be done. Lord Jesus, we're all vulnerable to fear. None of us like to fail. We remember our past failures and we don't want to repeat those. We don't want to look foolish. We don't want to embarrass you. We don't want to hurt others. And sometimes doing nothing is a way of assuring that no one is hurt. where mistakes aren't being made. And yet we know that's not how your kingdom works. Your kingdom works with us in hand with you, risking to cross the road, trusting you, taking that first step and moving into a place whereby your presence and wisdom and power will enable as we trust you, as we have our faith in you. We ask this in the strong name of Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you so much, Brian. And welcome, Brian, as well. Brian is with us today in the flesh. And we've got a number of questions that have already come in, but please feel free as he's answering these questions. If more things come to mind, go ahead and shoot me a private message. I'll put it on the list. Some of the questions are similar, so we'll see how Brian answers it and then decide which ones to go to next. But let's go ahead. And Thomas, you sent a question in. We've had some comments on. So if you don't mind, go ahead and ask Brian your question.
Yes, most of us are aware of the unspeakable suffering that's going on in India with the COVID, the explosion of COVID cases. And I've been doing ministry. I have ministry contacts there, many for 20 or 25 years. Every one of them has someone in their family who has died from COVID. So my question is, how does faith play a role in such an overwhelming, sad time, I guess, where suffering is everywhere, suffering and death is everywhere?
Yes, thank you. We have a family situation. We live north of Toronto, and we have had, I have a family, a daughter and son-in-law and 3 boys with enormous challenges internally. 2 of the boys have a very rare syndrome. They have intelligence of 2-year-olds. The family has been locked down. The husband was in hospital for a month with hypertension. And the whole family got COVID, so they were locked down and couldn't go to school, and we couldn't visit apart from us bringing meals to their door. So that's just a kind of a little microcosm of what other people are facing. I think that the idea of faith is that there are incremental moments within one's reality where we, recognizing whatever that reality is, we initiate those small items, those small ideas, whereby we push beyond those borders that fear defines. And we say, in this moment, I am not going to allow myself to be taken over by the zeitgeist or the cultural mood of fear and of panic. And I'm going to do something that in the face of that fear says there is something else that we can do, that we will do, trusting that God will enable us in the risking that we take in whatever small area it might be. And both in our own lives and our expression to the community we serve, we show that fear does not become the ruling paradigm. And I think faith is, when I say that faith is of the will, faith is not that what I believe in. Faith is what I do. Faith is a willful motion that's initiated by me in some area that refuses to allow the fear element to be the definer of what I do or don't do that day. Does that make any sense to you, Thomas?
Yeah. You know, I think of Bonhoeffer's and his attack of cheap grace and his referring to the story of Jesus coming to the disciples in the boat, and Peter getting up out of the boat and walking on water and making the point that cheap grace is staying in the boat. It's having faith, like you're saying, is something you do. It's something that your belief causes you to get up out of the boat. And you don't know you have faith until you're out of the boat. And that's when you really have faith. And I guess I've been asking myself, all right, what can I do more than just pray about this situation in India? What is God asking us to do to get out of the boat here and be the family of God to so many others who every star in their heaven has come down?
Yes. And faith is not just doing something. Faith is doing something that I think has some inspiration by the Spirit. And so for Ananias, he didn't initiate action with Saul of Tarsus just because he knew that Saul of Tarsus was around. It came within the mix of the Spirit engaging Ananias on an issue that Ananias was frightened of course. And so what I would do in your situation, and I'm in the same situation, but in obviously different details, is in my prayer, what does the Spirit bring to mind that we might do with people, with conditions, that we might do both as a demonstration that fear will not define me, but also as a way of doing good for others? Is there something that the Spirit that would remind me, or that the community? I see, Thomas, you're with your wife. So in your prayer, the two of you, what might you come up with? An idea, a risking idea that may be a small risk, maybe a large risk, but a risk that tests faith, that resists, that pushes up against the inertia that fear creates. And so I would look for the community. I would look for prayer as a way of finding in my own mind, what might I do today or tomorrow or in the near future that is pushing up against this boundary of fear.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Thomas, for that. We're going to move from Taiwan over to Thailand now, because I think, Martin, you've got a great question. It's kind of a follow-up that I think will dovetail nicely into this.
Audio. Okay, now I'm on. Yeah, we are pastoring a Thai German-speaking international church here in northern Thailand, and we are facing a phenomenon. We have quite a number of mixed families, mixed marriages, and the phenomenon is the Thai part is panicking because of COVID, while the German or the Swiss or the German-speaking part is absolutely relaxed. And now my question is, how can we minister to these families? Because the husbands decided to do their wives a favor, not to come to the Bible studies, not to attend church services any longer. And it's really a challenge to encourage these couples in the midst of the pandemic. And you need to know Thailand is doing very, very well. We have, since the start of the pandemic, in 1.5 years, we have 500 deaf people, not more. But the climate of fear is rising because of the media, and Thai people tend to believe everything that's on the media.
Wow. Oh, that is interesting. So the real factor then is the Thai mindset, not the German Swiss mindset.
Exactly, yeah.
That, and while you or I might be bemused or annoyed by people who become anxious because of what they hear in the media, the reality is that those women do feel those anxieties, and you've got to face those. it may be that you just have to provide some other means for fellowship and congregational meeting to meet them, or find some Thai scientist who is speaking what you think is more true of the situation, and speak specifically into the anxiety. So face the anxiety. Don't be annoyed by it. Find a way of bringing those women into, if it's primarily the Thai wife.
That's true.
Yeah, is to tell them that you understand their anxiety, and that you are not going to play with their anxiety or push them to unreasonable levels where you exacerbate their anxiety, but you want to speak into their concerns and really show them that their problem is your problem too. And their problem is everyone's problem, and you don't want to make it the only theme, but for them to be assured that you as pastor are sensitive to what they are feeling. And if you can find, as I said earlier, a medical voice, a Thai medical voice that can speak into that group, maybe even by bringing that person on to a Zoom meeting with those women, and just allowing them to vent and to express their concerns and to hear answers. But I think to speak into that and to face it would be maybe you're probably already doing it, but I would just want to reinforce that.
Yeah. So what I did was I encouraged the husbands, and I told them, you are doing exactly the right thing, not to act against the fears of their wives, but to accept it and not coming to church, because all these women are Christians. Most of them are very, very young Christians. So they need to be very sensitive in modeling how to deal with the fear of their wives. So I thought it's important that they know that they are doing exactly the right thing in honoring their wives and not doing anything against their will.
That makes, yeah, I would agree with that, Martin.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Martin, for the question. Thank you, Brian, for that answer. Now, I think another question will come in nicely with this. We'll go over to Mali in West Africa. And John, are you here? I know you had some computer problems.
I'm here.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah, so kind of coming back to the COVID situation, a lot of governments have put in place mandates that churches can't meet or that gatherings need to be limited, but we have churches that are stepping out in the name of faith beyond those government mandates. Where does faith supersede government mandates? I mean, I think a lot like when Notre Dame was burning down, they weren't holding services inside the church saying, the church is on fire, but God's going to protect us in faith. So where do we separate faith and testing God?
Yes, that's boy, haven't we found that to be true. We've got churches in Canada, pastors in Canada that are embarrassing Jesus and embarrassing the Christian community by being foolish. Faith is not foolishness. Yeah. Faith operates in the zone of doability, of the possibility of accomplishment. It is not looking at a timber falling down on you and saying, God, defy gravity. God doesn't defy gravity just because we pray. He may intercept in very particular situations, but for pastors to defy government ruling is in this situation, I think, is simply foolish. For me, the parable that really, I think, speaks into this is the Good Samaritan. What does it mean to be a Good Samaritan today in the COVID crisis? We recognize that governments will do foolish things. Governments are fallible, and they will do things that, in our estimation, are unneeded and quite foolish. But as we live in community, we have used government is the means by which we operate in civility. So as civilians, we operate in a coordinated fashion, and in democracies, be they strong or weak democracies, we operate by asking government to coordinate critical issues, and the COVID thing is a critical issue. So to say to the government that is responsible for governing the rules that guide us during this crisis, I think is an absolute violation of our commitment in the voting process. And secondly, to defy the science of COVID, even though we may not be contacted by it, there may be other mitigating factors that make COVID less a factor. When they ask us not to join together in fellowship, in a physical setting, they aren't denying our Christian belief. They aren't saying you cannot meet together because we do not want you as a church to meet together, or we deny your Christian faith. They are doing it as a way on a short-term basis to solve an immediate problem. And if we believe that a church is meeting together, that's the definition of a church. We've got a problem. And secondly, we got a problem with the whole notion of the church. But secondly, we are violating what is, I think, is so dominant. And that's, what does it mean to be a good neighbor today? So I am deeply disturbed by those people that violate the government instructions on this. It's a short-term measure. It's not long-term. It is not fundamental to our faith. And I would say that faith in this situation is learning to live with a government regulation, even if we think it's a foolish regulation.
Thank you so much, Brian and John, for that. No, great question. And yeah, I'm still stuck on Notre Dame burning down, and should we stay there in faith or not? But I want to move on north to the Netherlands. And I think Andy's got a great question that'll fit into this, of how we as leaders have to deal with our faith and fear.
Yeah, hi Brian. Thanks very much for the talk today. As it was great last time as well. I'm still smiling from John's Notre Dame.
Yes, that's a great. I'm going to use that one, fellas.
Yeah, that's staying with me a long time. What helped? In your years of ministry experience, what's helped you to keep in faith, in that sense of being persuaded by the Lord rather than being overwhelmed by fear or anxiety in your ministry and leadership? And so not just right now with COVID, but of course there are other challenges. What's helped you to keep in faith rather than get overwhelmed by the fear thing?
Andy, you trigger my mind into the memories. I'm going to be 80 next year, so I have lots of memories. One thing that I have found to be really helpful is personally to have moments of evaluation where I look at both my life and the ministry that I led, and ask, how are we doing? What are we doing that we should do, that we shouldn't do? And what are we not doing that we should do? And then also taking that series of questions into the leadership team and having time to reflect and look together at all that's being done. So that may be a little more of a macro question on the ministry and then on your personal life. I have found also that a mentor that I would expose my thoughts to and ask for response. I wish that I had more formally engaged a mentor through my life. I had many mentors, but I didn't think of them in those terms, and I didn't access them on a more deliberate way. I wished I had done that. I think I would have benefited more from it. when I went to Tyndale, to the university that had collapsed, I did have a mentor, and I accessed him on a regular basis. Actually, there was a woman and a man, and the two of them I accessed, and they were very helpful. So I would, the other way, of course, is a journal. I don't know how disciplined you are, but journaling as a way of noting what I'm feeling today creates memory, so that when you go to the more macro question, you can go back to the individual notations and remind yourself of what you went through, or what you felt, or what you saw in those particular days. So of course, occasionally we are encountered with something that pushes us to the faith-fear equation. It happens immediately, it happens without warning, and we've got to engage in that. But I would say, in terms of personal living and ministry leadership, I would find times during the year, of asking the question, reflecting, giving yourself to think about it. And I have found the biblical stories those narratives have been really instructive to me. So, for example, Nehemiah has been a mentor to me all my life, and I would often read Nehemiah and look at his life, and out of the observation of what he did, it posed questions about myself and what I was doing, because Nehemiah, led an organization, and that's something that I did. So that was particularly helpful. And others, more recently, Caleb. Caleb, as you know, he did not finish what he started when he started with Joshua, and when he was 80 years of age. And so it kind of, the age paradigm kind of fits around me. So a couple of years ago, I was finding myself drifting, and I was getting spiritually lazy, I thought. And I was asked to do something, and I decided, and I resisted it. And I found that Caleb, the narrative of Caleb, caught me, and I remember I wrote in my journal, Stiller, never use age as an excuse for not trusting God by faith. So that was a shocker. Caleb just spoke boom into my life. So there's just some ideas that respond to your very, very important question, Andy.
Thanks, Brian. That's great. Thank you.
Well, actually, Andy, I know you had a second question as well. So why don't you go ahead and ask that question?
I was still scribbling down answers to the first one, but okay, Brian, sorry, it's me again. What has helped you over the time to discern the difference between wise planning and planning that's possibly more based from fear and anxiety and not? How do you balance that planning and faith?
Yeah. Well, I guess there are certain things that we do that as individuals and as organizations do, that's essential, that is cyclical, it's seasonal, it's annual, and those things need to be done without pushing them beyond the doing of them. So the running of a church, the running of a ministry, the managing of your life, there are certain things we simply want to do because functionally they keep everything else together. But in the doing of it, there are moments, there are times within the cycle of an organization or of your life when a thing that is normative, a thing that is predictable, the thing that is cyclical, you may, or somebody else may look at that and wonder whether last year, to do this year what we did last year, may not be good enough. Or it may come by your own sense of impatience that what you did last year that you're repeating this year, it's only being done because repetition lowers people's anxiety. So I would look for what is critical. What is the most important thing in your church, in your organization, in your life this year that might make it different from last year? And of course, the COVID thing. I was talking to a university who's looking for a new president, and I asked the question to the chair of the search committee, what do you understand about students coming from high school this year that makes them different from students who came from high school last year? And they said, oh, we never thought of that. And I said, you never thought of that? I mean, here we've got this biggest crisis that any of us have really faced globally. And it didn't occur to you that the students have different needs this year coming into first year university as compared to former years. So there may be some things that are so obvious. I mean, they're the elephant in the room. But I do think it's very good to collaborate, think it through. We all have our close colleagues, one or two or three that we could trust, and give them opportunity of asking you the questions of what's going on, what's needed, what might be, what are the dominant factors that keep us from doing more or doing better or going deeper, whatever the advanced word is, whatever the word is on advancing, what is keeping us? So again, ask the question, what are we doing just because we've done it before? What are we doing that we shouldn't do? What are we not doing that we might do? I tend to eliminate the words should or ought. I find those to be legalistic and obligatory, and I don't find obligation so much a faith motivation. So I tend to, what might we do? What is the Spirit calling us to do? I'm blathering a bit just to try and fill the question. Am I speaking to you what you're asking, Andy?
Sorry, just unmuting. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also that, as you say, that whole thing about that whole language should, I think we can be, it's not just fear driven, we can be very guilt driven rather than
absolutely
flowing from a place of grace. And I think what you're saying about, what keeps us from going deeper or further or whatever it might be, an example you gave the college, I think, and maybe it's true for others here as well, hopefully journeying towards the time of coming out of COVID, is how does faith impact planning, so that it's not just we're just going to try and go back to how it was before, because I know certainly in my own mind we're not going back to how it was before, and that's not a bad thing, but I'm not sure what it looks like in the future. But I know there are some within a congregation who are just like, we can go back to how it's before. We won't need the live stream anymore. We won't, we don't need to do online. And I'm like, no, the world has changed. But it's how to balance where it's faith and planning. And I know the two aren't in contradiction, but I know at the same time it can be easy to plan from fear, like, oh no, the numbers are dropping off or whatever. And so no, thank you. That's good food for thought. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Andy.
All right, we've got time for one last question. So let's go south to Tanzania and David Owens. We can get this in before the top of the hour.
Hi, Brian, I hope this isn't the kind of question or being asked, what's your answer for world peace? But it kind of almost feels that way, because my question is, what insights do you have, or what encouragements do you have, or keys for us to kind of walk through this time, especially in the Palestinian scenario there, with this deeply divided, the Zionism, and I just read an article in Pathos that said, is genocide okay for Palestinians? And that just hit me between between the eyes. And, how do I, Jesus said in John 13, they'll know us by how we get on with each other and love and respect each other, not by how good we are at evangelism. And I find that's a challenge because of this deep divide. And how do I, as someone who thinks he knows or is wanting to operate in a very unified way and bring healing rather than division, how do I walk that out? Because to be honest with you, I'm struggling with my faith in that area. God, what are you doing? How do I reflect you in front of a watching world as a pastor, demonstrating my love for other pastors that are very divisive or yeah.
Oh boy, that is like asking how do you solve world peace? I think there is a very important role for a pastor to be the paradigm of wisdom and to demonstrate in our understanding and what we say that others would look on us, even if they disagree with us, to be wise. There is, the Zionism and the pitting of that against any concern of the Palestinian situation is something we face in the evangelical world. We have a predilection towards Israel and thus a covering of their sins, as if that's excused because of some kind of eschatological plan. And I'm sure we all know what I'm talking about there. So you have some of your pastors that who are very much enmeshed in a Zionism. That for them is their collective wisdom. That is what they believe in. It is so systemic to their theology, to their biblical interpretation, and to their understanding of world events. And so if you come along and question the legitimacy of their collective view, you'll only get reaction. You won't move them at all. They won't see the other side because you're threatening their whole their system of thinking. And so I find with the liberal and conservative, I say to my conservative friends who are trying to speak to the liberal friends, don't attack their systemic view. Help them understand something else beyond what they believe. Don't say what you're believing is wrong, but take them, bring into your court and tell them stories. I think storytelling is the most powerful way to get people to at least pause from their passionate commitment to one side to seeing something else. It's interesting, in the World Evangelical Alliance, of which I'm a part, we have alliances in Israel and the West Bank. In fact, just a year and a half ago, Abbas, he finally gave authority to our Palestinian Evangelical Alliance out of Ramallah to exist. And that was a huge advance for these 12 churches, because it gives them a chance they can marry and bury, and they can even have a bank account, and they can even buy property now. So that was a huge advance. But you can imagine within our collective community, we've got the Israeli Regional Alliance, and we've got the Palestinian Regional Alliance. And what I have found is that if I can get the various sides telling their stories have a way of breaking down people's ideological barriers. And if you can facilitate that and not come across as a Palestinian provocateur, as one that is, you see that person as a Zionist, they see you as a Palestinian promoter. if your life can be a source of wisdom for them, I find that in these critical issues, if you become that person that in a sense is above those, even though in your heart you aren't above those, you will become a person that they will access on other issues besides this. But for example, Jack Serra, who is president of Bethlehem Bible College, he's a person, he's a young man, able young man, but he is wise. He has the ability in that situation to help others understand the broader picture. And he's very good at storytelling and taking people into other worlds and letting them hear other stories. So that's a. I'm sorry, it seems like such a modest response, David, to that very complex question. But I think let me restate it. Be careful that you don't become the opposite to what you feel is a marginal or a shallow view. So triangulate. Yeah, let's triangulate the situation. So you've got A, B, and then triangulate by giving C, and let C be simply a storytelling into both sides. So you have stories from both sides that elicit responses, and it may be that if you had a pastoral meeting in your city in East Africa, you may have a way of talking into the situation and not, and again, I go back to what I said earlier, not trying to take apart a person's collective view on the matter. Right. Am I coming anywhere close to what you're talking about, David?
It's very helpful. Very helpful. Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
yeah,
David.
Because it's really tough. But us ministering in the context, we're not doing direct ministry to Muslims. But boy, we have Muslims come and they're getting saved within our church. That's not our key focus, but my goodness, that we're inviting them into a community of faith that can't have this kind of narrative going on. Yeah. Thank you, David, so much. Yeah.
David, just a word. I may be doing a pastors conference in your country in the coming months, and if I had your email, I'd be glad to connect with you if that comes about.
That'd be wonderful. That would be great. I'll send it. I'll put it up now.
Okay.
Thank you, David, for the question. Thank you, Brian. It is a complicated issue. There's probably even many different views, even within our group here, on how to understand this. And I would just say, two things for us to remember, especially as international church leaders. One, being pro one people group should not mean you're anti another people group.
That's right.
And we are not anti any group. We can't be. But the other thing is to remember, and we know this well as IC leaders, our citizenship is not with an earthly country anyway. Yeah. And there are Christian brothers and sisters in Israel and in Palestine. I know many of you have been there. I've been there. I've met with Christians in Palestine. There's also Christians in Israel. So as far as our brothers and sisters, we have them on both sides. And so it's a very serious and complex issue. But yeah, so thank you, Brian, for that. We're going to go on into our breakout rooms now, and we look forward to that time. And then from there, when you guys finish chatting, you'll pray for each other and go on, and we will see you again on June 8th. And thank you again, Brian.
Thank you. Good to be with you people. I'm sorry. I was looking forward to going to Thailand.
I would like that. Oh, Brian, do you want to say just briefly what you'll talk about next time on June 8th?
Yeah, I'm going into Acts 10. It's an interesting, it's the story of Peter and Cornelius. And it is, for me, I think one of the highlights in Acts. I think it's probably the highlight for me. It is such a fulcrum on which the whole gospel turns. And for me, it has powerful messages, and I hope it'll be for you as well.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think we all are. Feel free to invite more international church leaders or even leaders within your churches to come. They're all welcome. We also have the later time. So depending on where you're at, that can be more convenient, especially for volunteer leaders in your church. And with that, Michelle, please launch the breakout rooms. But we're going to start by going down to Argentina. And Werner's got a poignant question for you, Brian.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Brian. Thank you for
Hi,
sharing.
Werner.
I have a very real question that I've encountered in our congregation, and I'm sure others have, especially when it comes to COVID. That's created a lot of fear in people's lives, of course. So the question is, when does being responsible become being fearful? And when does having faith become being irresponsible? Because it's a very personal thing for people. They believe God's going to protect me, and they go out. And other people say, just stay indoors because maybe I'm going to get sick. So how would you approach that? How would we deal with that and share that with people and encourage them to move from faith to fear?
Werner, that is such a life lesson. My goodness, couldn't we you could do a series on that, couldn't you? Faith is not being foolish. Faith is doing what is possible. Faith is risking, but if I walk off a 10-story building and say by faith I'm going to resist God's creation, i.e. gravity, that's not faith, that's stupidity. We have some pastors in Canada that are embarrassing Christ and embarrassing the rest of us by being foolish. So faith is doing what is possible. I mean, in a sense, it's doing what's impossible, but it's impossible is a metaphor. It's not an absolute term. What I might think is impossible, you might see as being possible. And so you operate faith out of what is possible, what can be done with God's help. But when we take and ignore what is evidentiary, you've got people who are dying. Friends of mine have died. My pastor, he and his wife, former pastor, he and his wife, they both got COVID. She died and he almost died. So it's a very real factor. When we pretend that is either incidental, it's a very modest disease, or that somehow by prayer we are prevented from it, we are operating in a kind of a foolish mindset. So I think that in this COVID situation, as people have talked to me about, what does a pastor do? I think first of all, a pastor is wise. A pastor is a shepherd. A pastor is not leading his sheep into places into gullies where there is a precipice that's unseen, that over which the lambs could fall and be self-destroyed. So wisdom is what I'm looking to for my pastor. I'm not looking for my pastor to be out in front of everybody else, being the kind of the national spokesman or maybe the national loudmouth, whichever might apply. I want that pastor to help me and my family be a thoughtful Christian today. And I think that through many of these things that are implied by social media, inflamed by social media, how we can operate with wisdom, how we can lead and serve and guide our people with wisdom, that to me has become that word, and just the ideas around wisdom has surfaced in my mind over the last couple of months that I've never known specifically as an ingredient of leadership, that I thought about as an ingredient of leadership in my life. I'm not answering your question specifically, Werner. Am I coming anywhere close to it?
Yeah, I think so. I think the other part of it is, as you said, okay, there are people who've now been vaccinated who now are, but they're still fearful. I think that's the big other thing that is happening as well. As things are opening up, how to really help people to move beyond, because now it's almost paranoia, and I've seen a lot of our people being so locked up, it's become unhealthy for them psychologically even, and to help them, hey, it's okay if you kind of go to the grocery store, be protected, be safe, but don't be paralyzed. Like you were saying, it's a paralyzing thing.
Well, I got my vaccine and I got COVID after I got my vaccine. So I'm one of the small percentages that got nailed with it. I was just kind of a modest head cold, so it wasn't severe. This might be a good opportunity, Werner, to take your people into discussion about how we live our lives as Christians in a very real world, in ways in which we are not inhibited by fear, by fearfulness. And of course, the classic verse, he has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And you may want to take and expound on the antithesis to fear, power, love, and a sound mind. And what does that mean today? So taking your people into the conversation, I think is a better way than to kind of play around the edges, but go straight at it and say, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, and filled with the Spirit, as we live today, what does it mean? How do we face those factors? I have a situation. I got a family. My daughter and her husband. They live nearby, and they have 3 boys. 2 of the boys, teenagers. They have a very curious syndrome. They have minds of 2-year-olds, so they're infants in mind, but they're teenagers. And the whole family got COVID, and they couldn't go to school, so we had lockdown. So we have worked our way through all of the fears of this and how you can do it properly, and then how we can help our children. So it's been a great experience for us to think with our children, who may have been who I think at times were fearful, and paranoia became more of the mood than thoughtfulness. And so I understand what you're talking about. We've lived right in the middle of it.
Thanks for the question, Werner. Thank you, Brian, for the answer. Now let's go north to your country, Brian, to Canada. And Ken Dreger has a question that really speaks to the heart of what a lot of IC leaders are dealing with, international church leaders. So Ken, if you would.
Sure. Hey, Brian, and hi, everybody. Brian, I recognize the fact that you have a global perspective on things. And many of us as IC leaders are kind of, like nose to the grindstone doing our thing. And so I'm wondering, from your global experience, what ways do you see that we as IC leaders needing to take risks with God to move into what he has for our future?
Wow. Ken, is it ever nice to see you again? Let me just give you some background. Ken was pastoring in Portage-la-Prairie, Manitoba. And I had just started with the Evangelical Fellowship, and I wanted to wrestle with some of the issues that we were dealing with in Canada as evangelicals. And I was designing this program, and I remember I met with you once, and I think we were in Winnipeg, and we got talking, and you said, well, why don't you come to our church and try it? And so it was that the church in Portage-la-Prairie that I started understanding our times, and Ken got about 6 or 7 people who would critique me. And afterwards, we went out that Saturday afternoon for lunch at a restaurant nearby, Ken, and those people helped me understand what to do, what not to do. And that event and what we did, I did about 200 of those through Canada over the next few years. That really built the Evangelical Fellowship, and it gave me a whole new ministry. So Ken, you helped launch me back then, so I thank you.
So maybe I'm just asking you to help us answer the same question now globally.
I think what North America, and I see it in Europe, well, I see it in China too. I see nationalism, Christian nationalism, as being a frightful defining of who I am as a Christian. Christian nationalism, which at the heart believes that my community, my people, often has ethnic lines to it as well. That God is concerned about our country and my well-being and my safety and my freedom, and I'm going to use the gospel as a way to either push or shape or intimidate our government to give me the kind of freedom so that I am not in any way intimidated or marginalized in my witness. And what that does, it pushes back our notion that all of people are God's creation, and that this country is not mine. I'm a Swedish heritage. That's where my grandparents came from. And so, and I'm obviously white, that notion that somehow I need to protect my country, and our fear of the migration, either by way of economic migration or by refugees or whatever the form is. I want to keep my country as it is and free from the incursion of other people into our world. And secondly, that the gospel is strengthened by me having a non-competitive environment. And so other religions should not be allowed into my world. So now this may be more of a North American and a European thing. And so where you are, Werner, in South America, John, you're in Tanzania?
In Mali.
Mali, I'm sorry. Yes, East Africa. So those factors may not play into there, but I think that the liberal conservative debate, which has been political and religious, is creating a fear of others. And so in the US especially, they have really gone through this tempest over the last few years. And I see it sometimes in Canada, although we tend to be more open to migrants and to refugees, but to really see them as God's people and see them as opportunities. I'm fumbling a bit, Ken, on this because I think I'm being too North American in my perspective on that. But you know, we do have the 80 million refugees, people that are stuck where they are. And I guess I've been thinking a bit about that. How do we help them be unstuck? How do we deal with the refugee? How do we as Christians deal with refugees? Ken, help me with your question again.
Well, let me just say this. Almost all of us, God has led us into international ministry somewhere. For me, it was in the Middle East. But doing that kind of thing, already we're in a spot where we're seeing cultures, multi-ethnicities, nations, races, whatever we want to call it, all the time in our churches. And that's normative for us. We could sit here, pride could come to us and say, well, we're not doing that we-they polarization thing that's happening in North America. In fact, we feel cutting edge in lots of ways. And when I first started into this, 15 years ago, there weren't even very many international churches, but now I'm looking at it and saying, we're almost normative now. International churches are all over the world. Yes, I think we can have a bit of a say into this polarization issue, but I'm wondering, you see the whole world. International churches, I think, have been given great opportunity to be part of that global movement that's different than what we see in Europe and North America.
Okay.
What risks should we be taking in the name of Jesus to capture the things that he wants to do, which are way beyond where we are now? And I would just end with this one thing, Brian. Many people in the West thought that when Britain and now the US and Canada began to secularize and implode, God would be caught in a corner, but he wasn't. He was doing grand things, and his church was larger in many countries in the 1040 window than the entire population of Canada. How do we leverage that through our international churches to take risks for God? Do you see any ways that we might be missing just hard working with our blinders on?
Thank you, Ken. That clarifies. As I have been in a number of your international churches, and as I move from around country to country, I recognize that the international church has stature and status that sets it apart. That you have expats, that you often deal with English, sometimes German or French, or maybe Spanish. Your churches will operate with a kind of a collective and a bit of an the status that you have is that you, and I use this word simply because I have no other way of no other metaphor, but you are above, you somehow you are a presence in the city that's one of a kind. And the one of a kind, I think, gives you stature with government. I'm generalizing, of course, but I was just thinking in Hanoi, where I've been a few times, that the communist government had respect for the international church because the international church represented the globe. And I think that internationalism and that you aren't generally caught in the spats and the on the ground disputes that'll often characterize evangelicals, and of course it really happened in Hanoi. That you are above those things, and I think you have influence with government, with embassies, and I would really see that as a clear strategy when you're in a city, is to have part of your strategy to build those connections with that wider civil society and be an influence in the country as a face for the gospel that maybe the locals and the nationals simply aren't able to bring, especially when you're in countries of other religious majority. That's just one thing that occurs to me, because and it may be, and again I'm just surmising here, but as you minister, really understand that stature that comes by the nature of your church, and utilize it. It's a gift, it's a strength, and I would really encourage you, because it becomes an encouragement to the rest of the body of Christ, and you can do maybe some interference on some issues that would surface within that city or that country. Does that make any sense, Ken?
It does, totally. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ken, for the question. Thank you, Brian. Now let's move back down to Colombia, and Andrew has got a fantastic question for you. So Andrew, if you would ask Brian.
Brian, thanks for doing this.
Hi, Andrew.
As you look at the growth and the history of the global church, there's this notion that at least I feel like I deal with almost weekly, that faith is antithetical to wisdom, reason, strategy. Do you have any sense where that came from?
Yeah, I think of lazy minds, people who want God to do a miracle for them when God wants us to do it themselves. It's an easy way out. I was raised in a Pentecostal community, and I've seen too much of that in my life. And also what happens is that faith becomes petty. It becomes God serving as my errand boy. I think that the bigger issues, I mean, it's one thing to have faith for God to heal your ingrown toenail, and let me not dismiss that as being important, because it may hobble you. But I just think that the presence of God in our lives, in our communities, with broken and hurting people, it takes faith. It takes a risk-taking element of people who in their daily lives go beyond the circumference of their comfort and find ways to intercept, to engage with, to help people in their community and in their workplace who are stressed in various ways, and to risk my life, to risk my relationship by helping others. And what I've been trying to do myself is taking this issue of faith being that which I risk, knowing that without God's help, I'll fail. That's how I'm defining faith. And take that experience, that initiative of faith, out into the world where people are unknown to me, or maybe even I perceive to be my enemies, but are in need. And trusting God to bring his enablement in that risking, where the faith is directed towards helping another rather than my own particular, solving my own particular problem, or bringing healing to just my own brokenness, which of course is important, but it's so often it becomes that. And so our prayers, personal prayers, our communal prayers, often center around each other, and we want to pray for each other. We want to pray for our own needs, but somehow moving our thoughts and our behaviors out into other areas where the risk really is only the risk is only met by the presence of the Lord enabling me where I initiate. Andrew, am I coming anywhere close to what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious that I mean, I see this as something very dangerous and agree that it's lazy minds. Is that coming from my country blasting out TV preachers that propagate this, or is it always been pervasive throughout the history of the church? Yeah, I'm curious, like the cultural historical roots.
Yeah, I think it's self-defense. It's kind of spiritual narcissism. I remember when the disciples were walking along and they said, "There's somebody that's preaching another gospel. Should we call fire down on heaven?" And Jesus just rebuked them. That was the easy way out for them, to get God to do a miracle on their behalf. But I do think that our self-interest and it's a shallow, almost silly faith that God is concerned about all the little things of my life, and yet the big things of the world I leave to the politicians, or I leave to the economists. And I don't. So historically, Andrew, I don't know where it comes from. I think it's very human. If I could go back into the I've been reading a book. In fact, I've been doing a review of it. It's called The Canadian Pentecostal Reader. It's the first of its kind, and it's the stories from 1907 to 1925 and the founding of the Pentecostal Church in Canada. And what they have done is they've taken the newsletters of the early people, and they've published all these newsletters. And as I read these newsletters, they're doing the same thing that you're asking about, Andrew. They're microscopic. They're self-centered. They aren't seeing the macro picture. And I think the weakness of us as people is that we don't see the white and harvest fields. We only see our own backyard.
Well, thank you for that, Brian. I think a good follow-up to this question actually comes from Diane in Italy. So Diane, if you don't mind asking Brian your question.
Morning, Brian. Good. I'm so appreciative of your taking time and helping us understand a lot of aspects about our walk with the Lord and how we lead well. My question kind of hinges too on that risk taking. I'm thinking about the fear that we have as leaders, especially when we're talking about the international church and often the dealing with short-term people who are coming quickly through our congregations, and we often have this fear: do I empower them? I mean, I think it goes over the top. Do I release them? How do I do this? And we think they're just here for a little bit of time, and do I turn over programs to them, ministries to them? How do I navigate the often risk that I may be challenged with to keep my church on track, but also learn how to release people into the ministries that God has called them to?
Oh, goodness, Diane, that really, I haven't thought of that. That's a strategic choice. I think that and there you have to, I think it's important to ask the question, at what point is my strategy empowering or limiting? It may be that a person who is only there for a short term, maybe 2 years, maybe 18 months, whatever, that you would weaken your ministry by giving something to a person who may be gifted in that area, but by their short-termness would get something going and then it falls apart because there's no one to carry it on. It may be that person's strategy would be to train somebody to carry on after they leave, that the strategy would be on the continuity and the training of others rather than them doing it themselves. But again, you're framed by the needs of your people and having both continuity and longevity. So I think it's absolutely fair. It's not being ruled by fear when you say, do I empower them and then they leave us in the lurch? To ask the strategic question, if I'm empowering them and then they leave us in the lurch, I don't think it's fearfulness to say, well, no, we aren't going to go that way. You're being wise and strategic. So somehow being strategic and being hopeful and empowering, you've got to find a way to make that work. And I'm just not smart enough to give you an answer on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Brian. All right, I think we've got time for one last quick question. So we're going to go over to West Africa, to Mali, and John has got a good follow-up question on that one.
Thank you. I still like Diane's question. I want to explore that.
Yeah, what would you do with that, John?
Oh, that's the problem, is I haven't done anything with it. So I haven't trusted people the way I need to. Okay. But my question comes down to, what's the difference between having a plan B with God's plan and having a contingency plan? Because we all have contingency plans. If something were to happen to me, who's going to run church on Sunday, this kind of thing.
Yeah, John, when I said you don't have a plan B with Joshua crossing the Jordan, I was being a bit frivolous, I guess. I'm always working on multiple plans. I guess what I'm saying is that as I said, I'm always trying to cover up in case something doesn't go right, if God doesn't show up, I've got another way. I guess the risk factor in faith is really finding my comfort and security in the Lord's presence and his enablement. And I think it's something that we grow in it. We test it. It's a muscle. We use it or we lose it. And as we take and trust him in the small things, we build capacity to move on to beyond that. But I would, when I suggest that we operate by faith, I just know that for me, it's been an incremental experience. And sometimes I have moved forward, which I thought was in faith. and it hasn't worked out. But I think the testing of that, the testings of the margins of my faith is something that it's almost a daily thing. It may be in small ways. It may occasionally, it's a couple of times in my life, it's been in a major way, but most of the time it's very minor. It's very small. It's very almost inconsequential and unseen by others. But where I am testing, pushing beyond what I can normally accomplish and saying, Lord, this which I am seeking to do, which I think is in your will, my discernment says, yes, this is a good thing to do, but I can't do it without your enablement. And that margin between what I can do and what I can't do, that's the margin of faith that calls me to risk, but not being foolish about it.
Thanks so much for that answer,
That's
Brian.
very helpful. Thank you.